It directly links this holiday and this sort of time period together with the Hades and Persephone cycle. Welcome back to the Diaries of a Witch podcast. My name is Angelica, and today we have a little bit of a new setup. We have, some new vibes. So I just kind of wanted to talk about that for a second, and then we'll get into the episode, which is all about the Festival of Anthesteria that is coming up that I am so excited about. So if you are watching this on YouTube, you can probably tell that I got a new camera. I changed the camera a little bit. I used to film on my webcam, and that was really good for a while because I could really quickly and easily get the episodes out and that sort of thing. And I needed a new computer to process the raw footage from a camera like this. I actually have had this camera for a while, but I haven't been able to use it because I just had a computer that didn't have a lot of RAM on it. Anyway, I got a new computer, and partially because of the help of my patrons. So thank you so much for all of my patrons. Thank you for being a patron. Your monetary assistance really does help in terms of helping making the podcast better, improving my content overall. Something else really wild happened today. So I was sitting at the altar over there, my Hades altar, and we had an earthquake in the Massachusetts, New Hampshire area this morning that I'm recording this. And I'm at the Hades altar. I actually did a little reel. I was filming a reel where I was creating a candle votive offering for Hades, and so I was kind of showing that a little bit. And I'd finished the reel. I had sat down at the altar, talked to Hades, given my petition, etc., just kind of did my normal Hades offering stuff. And I always program my votive candles with some type of intention. Sometimes it's just an intention for devotion or for offering or to give Hades something. Sometimes it's an intention to receive something in return, kind of more of a novena or a petition candle. I like to take that opportunity when I make new votive candles to do that for my deities. I like to set an intention, either thaumaturgical or theurgical, right? So I asked Hades to receive what I asked for, and what the candle would be charged with. And then a couple minutes later, after I asked Hades to receive my offering, everything started shaking, and I was like, oh my gosh, is this the underworld? Is this an earthquake? I didn't know what it was at first. I was like, is this a truck going down the street? And at the time, I was actually filming the candle that I had just charged. And so I have video footage of the candle that I had charged. Okay, let's get into the topic of today, which is around Anthesteria. The Festival of Anthesteria is an ancient holiday mostly associated and attributed to Dionysus. It mostly celebrates Dionysus. However, there are other deities and other beings and energies and daemons that are also honored during this time period, which I think is so cool. So Anthesteria takes place in the lunar month of Anthesterion. The name Anthesteria literally means feast of flowers, and the Anthesterion, the month, the lunar month, is about flowers and spring and kind of the first little hints of spring happening. If you are somebody who studied Wicca, or you are maybe familiar with other types of pagan traditions this time of year, you might say, oh, it's kind of similar to the message of Imbolc in a way, right? Imbolc is this Celtic holiday that is talked about widely in Wicca and neo-paganism, and it's on February 1st. It is kind of the first stirrings of spring. Oftentimes people will celebrate Saint Bridget or Brigid on this day and her sacred fires, and the idea is that, the goddess begins to stir, right? And in a way, this is kind of what Anthesteria is partly about. This festival has the most to do with Dionysus. There are so many underlayers to the meaning of this festival that have so much to do with Persephone, Zagreus, Hades, Chthonic Hermes, the Kyries, and so many other daemons and spirits of the dead and chthonic deity. So even though it is kind of like on paper a festival to Dionysus, it's also like an underworld holiday. And so me being a Hades devotee and somebody who loves the underworld, Anthesteria is one of my absolute favorite festivals of the year, and really one of the only festivals in the Attic calendar that really strives to connect with the underworld and the spirits of the dead and ancestors. So ancestors are a big part of Anthesteria as well. The idea that you ought to be honoring your ancestors or giving offerings to ancestors. On the third day of Anthesteria in particular, it's a 3-day festival. That day is associated the most with the dead and offerings to ancestors or to like restless dead. Let's talk a little bit more about the setup of this festival in particular and how it was celebrated. Anthesteria is a festival that takes place from the 11th to the 13th day of the lunar month of Anthesterion. This year, the lunar month of Anthesterion begins on the full moon in Aquarius on January 29th. So essentially 11 to 13 days after the new moon would make Anthesteria fall under the full moon. This year in 2025, the 3-day festival falls from February 10th to February 12th. This month is also when the lesser mysteries of Persephone and Demeter started to be taught. So essentially in the fall, in the month of Bodromian and approximately around the autumnal equinox, there is this city called Eleusis in the ancient world, which held this massive, massive festival. Initiates from all over the region that qualified would come and become initiated into Persephone and Demeter's mystery cult at Eleusis. However, there were smaller events called the lesser mysteries that would have been performed during the month of Anthesterion to prepare initiates for the mysteries in the fall. So it directly links this holiday and this sort of time period together with the Hades and Persephone cycle. If we think about it right now, like, okay, Persephone is in the underworld with Hades, at least in the northern hemisphere. I don't know. Y'all in the southern hemisphere, I don't know what y'all are up to. At this time, during the time of Anthesteria, Hades and Persephone are hanging out, they're together, they're chilling in the underworld, but she is starting to make her rise, right? She is beginning this process of anabasis, of sort of slowly wakening up to the world outside of the underworld. And this process isn't going to, be finished until later in the spring, but it begins, it starts, these mysteries start to unfold. And the Festival of Anthesteria gives us a little bit of insight into what that might mean. Something really interesting about the Eleusinian mysteries is it's sort of revealed to the initiates of the mysteries that there is this divine child of the underworld. He's often referred to as Bremos. Sometimes he's referred to as Dionysus or Zagreus. Ebolus is another epithet that sometimes gets associated with the divine child of the underworld. This is a son of Persephone, essentially, right? Sometimes Zeus is the father, sometimes Hades is the father, depending on what account, what myth, what translation we're looking at. But essentially, who is this divine child that gets revealed to the initiates in the Eleusinian mysteries? Well, this child is Zagreus Dionysus, essentially, right? That's basically what we can tell from that. And this festival of Anthesteria directly celebrates Dionysus, especially in his more chthonic underworld aspect or epithet, right? And there's also like so many really cool things about Anthesteria that is like directly tied to Orphic cosmology, and so many things having to do with Orphism, which is this religious movement that celebrated Zagreus and Dionysus together. Zagreus is the divine child of the underworld. He is born, he is kind of like a deity of light and enlightenment, and part of his entire thing, right? He is here to help the souls of humanity expand and achieve this type of higher consciousness, essentially, right? That's kind of one way that we can read what Zagreus was trying to do. He's associated with the bull, which is a later symbol of Dionysus. He's associated with the heart and the human will, and how the immortal soul is contained in the heart. And that soul, essentially, when you die as an initiate of, the let's say the Orphic mysteries, which were based off of this idea, your soul would remain immortal. You would escape the cycle of reincarnation and you would get to live among the gods. And so essentially the Titans, mostly Kronos and Typhon, tear Zagreus apart and kill him, essentially. However, his heart is the only thing that remains. And again, we talked about the symbolism of the heart. His heart is the only thing that remains. And so Zeus takes Zagreus's heart, boils it into a potion, feeds it to Semele, and then the son of Semele, who is Dionysus, is born with Zagreus's immortal soul inside of him. So there's this transmutation that occurs, and this is one aspect of Dionysus and the story of Dionysus that is celebrated during the festival of Anthesteria. First day of Anthesteria is called the Pythagogia, which means uncorking, and essentially you would open up your bottles of wine that you had from last season, and you would open them up and you would drink them, kind of like to clear them out almost, right? You would drink them, you'd mix them with water, and you would give offerings to Dionysus. The other thing that happened on this day was you would decorate your home with flowers in honor of Dionysus, but I would also argue in honor of Persephone and the coming spring. And especially if we're kind of going with the idea that Persephone is the mother of Zagreus, who is essentially Dionysus, right? You know, he becomes Dionysus. It is not only to honor the fertility that Dionysus represents, but also the fertility of Persephone and the spring that is to come. Also on this day, spirits from the underworld, ancestral spirits, wandering spirits, all sorts of different types of spirits would be allowed to rise up from the underworld and come and visit you. So it's kind of like Spring Festival plus Day of the Dead vibes. It's like very, very fascinating. So you'd be opening up bottles of wine, you'd be putting flowers all around your house, and spirits of the dead would also be rising up to visit you. If we think a little bit more about Day of the Dead and the idea of having flowers on the altar to not only guide the dead to the altars, but also to, give as offerings to the dead, you could also think about flowers in that way as well in the festival of Anthesteria, right? Decorating your house with flowers to draw in your benevolent ancestors, spirits that you want in your home, and also to give it to them as an offering. So the second day is called Koe. This day is called the pouring, and it was a day of drinking games. There was like literal festivals and prizes given out to the person who could drink the most, which is funny. And it was just like a day of merriment. Something that's interesting about Anthesteria is that it was kind of considered a little bit of like an unlucky festival because the Greeks had this kind of like fraught relationship with death, right? I mean, we can tell that from the way that Hades is talked about and viewed. So these days were sort of considered to be like kind of unlucky. So there's a lot of protection magic that the ancients would have been doing at this time, especially to protect from the wandering spirits of the dead. So they would use hawthorn and buckthorn, and they would like chew the leaves, or they would create some type of like almost like a paste, and they would smear it around their door frames to prevent evil spirits from coming in. So and we'll talk a little bit about like modern implications of Anthesteria next, but it's interesting that a lot of protection magic in order to ward away these spirits of the dead at this time was also happening during this festival. The day of Koe, or the pouring, was also the day that celebrated the marriage of Dionysus and his mortal wife Ariadne. He later essentially turns her immortal, but there would have been this ritual reenactment of their marriage. And I really love the love story of Dionysus and Ariadne. It's like really cute. It's kind of like sad, but it's really cute. I feel like it's one of the most, almost, what's the word? Like, I feel like it's one of the most relatable love stories in all of Greek mythology. But essentially the story is that Ariadne is left by Theseus, who is like this hero, right? And she assists him in the myth of the Minotaur, right? She helps him literally get through and get out of the labyrinth successfully. And so she's really into Theseus, and he leaves her on an island stranded. What an asshole. We hate Theseus here. We're like a Theseus hate club. And then Dionysus finds her on this island and is like, hey, what the hell happened to you? You okay? Like, what's happening? And she's like, no, my asshole boyfriend left me here. My jock boyfriend left me here. And he ends up marrying her, falling in love with her, and making her immortal. So take that, Theseus. So essentially Dionysus and Ariadne's love story and their divine and sacred marriage would have been celebrated at this time. Again, another interesting parallel, the divine marriage, the sacred marriage, is something that is celebrated in both the springtime and in the fall in the cycle of Hades and Persephone. So we have this other divine marriage that doesn't necessarily explain how the seasons work or how the cycle of life and death works, but it links a mortal woman with this immortal god, right? And through their love, she becomes immortal. And so there's another parallel to the earlier myth of Zagreus and his transmutation, and also what he was trying to teach to humans, which is his mystery around the idea of the immortality of the soul. The last day of Anthesteria is called the Kitri, and this means pots. And essentially what would happen on this day, right? This is the day that would have been most celebrated as almost like a Day of the Dead type of celebration. So you would leave out these big earthen pots filled with grains and seeds, and oftentimes like the grains and seeds would be cooked in these pots, and this would be given to ancestors for the benevolent dead, for the spirits that are wandering the earth at this time. There's also another type of spirit called the Diaries who are wandering the earth at this time. So the Diaries or the Keres are kind of these vengeful spirits that hang out on really gory battlefields, like you hear Homer talking about them in the Iliad sometimes around like the battlefields, right? These spirits, these daemons could be seen kind of hovering over the battlefield. They're kind of psychopomp spirits, but they're also just kind of like spirits that feed on the violence and the gore of death, right? But they're often depicted when there's major battle scenes, and oftentimes they are assisting Chthonic Hermes or Thanatos or somebody in bringing these souls into the underworld. So the Diaries are celebrated on this day, as well as Chthonic Hermes, right? His epithet as the psychopomp of souls. So you would also leave out offerings for Chthonic Hermes. So this last day of Anthesteria, there was really no drinking, there was really like no festivities, it was just merely a festival of the dead, which is why it's so fascinating that this whole thing, right, is like a Dionysian festival, and people are like, but why? Like, yeah, there's wine and stuff, but why is the death associated with it? And I'm like, there's a little bit more to Dionysus than some people think, right? And this is why I love Dionysus, because he's got a little bit of mystery, right? He's got that soul of the child of the underworld within him, right? He is the divine child of the underworld, and sometimes we kind of forget that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how you can use this festival if you are somebody who wants to celebrate this in the modern world as a modern pagan. So first of all, there is a lot of protection magic going on at this time of year. So I would really recommend, working on your protections this time of year, whether it's creating wards, literally protecting your threshold, which was something that they did during this festival. You can use and call upon the herbals that they used, which were hawthorn leaf and berry, as well as buckthorn leaf. Also, flowers are a major part of this festival as well. So I love the idea of adorning your home and your threshold with flowers, allowing them to dry, maybe even weaving like some more protection ingredients in there as well. Think about the things that you like to do around Samhain or Day of the Dead, and this can be another festival where you can practice those same things, right? So another way that you could work with this energy is by holding an ancestral dinner or giving offerings to your ancestors, especially on that final day of Anthesteria, right? So that last day, calling upon your ancestors, lighting candles for your ancestors, leaving out flowers for your ancestors, and you can literally take a pot, some type of pot or bowl or dish or whatever, right? It doesn't have to be an earthenware pot if you don't have one. And you can fill it with things like grains and seeds, rice, orzo, lentils, like all of these things, right? You could use nuts, seeds, fruits. And you could essentially leave these out for your ancestors to consume and offer that to them. Any of your existing ancestral practices that you like to do, you can add in with those ideas as well. I like to give my ancestors coffee and water, and I'll talk to them about specific things that are happening in my life. So it's just a really great time to touch in with them. I love that Chthonic Hermes gets a little bit of a mention here. So something that you could also do, especially if you're like a Hermes devotee, is that you could literally use, especially the final day, as a celebration of Hermes in his underworld psychopomp aspect, right? So you could honor Hermes as somebody who brings souls to the underworld, who is a part of the life and death cycle, who is a part of this rebirth, this general kind of theme of rebirth and immortality that we have going on with this festival. I always associate Mercury retrograde with Mercury and his psychopomp epithet, right? Mercury as the bringer of souls. Whenever Mercury goes retrograde in the sky, I always imagine him as just, he's going into the underworld and he's doing shit in the underworld, right? He's not interacting with us anymore. He is essentially, absent, right? And he is in the underworld doing stuff in the underworld, which is why here on Earth, we sometimes feel the lack of Mercury in the air, right? We feel him retreat and go into a different space, into a different realm, and we miss him because then our cars stop working and our emails don't send and all this shit starts to happen, right? So this day could also be an amazing day to work with Hermes in his psychopomp aspect in preparation for the Mercury retrogrades that are coming up for the year, right? So we're having Mercury retrogrades in fire and water signs this year. When is the first Mercury retrograde? Let me look. I'm pulling this up on my Astrology of 2025 workbook, and you can get access to this as a diary or coven tier member of my Patreon. So if you want to take a look at the major transits of the year, have them all in an interactive workbook that you can type into based off of your natal chart, you gotta join. And you gotta grab it. So the first Mercury retrograde is happening on March 14th, 2025, which is a day before the first eclipse. Also, Venus is retrograde at this time, so we're gonna need all the help we can get with that. That's gonna be a lot. March is a lot. The astrology of March 2025 is a lot. So give some offerings for Hermes at this time so that he can spare you from the drama of the next Mercury retrograde. That's what I would recommend. This is also a great time to celebrate Dionysus in his epithet as Zagreus, right? So his precursor, the god that came before Dionysus, right? So there was essentially a sacrifice and rituals that were done, especially on the second day of Anthesteria, to symbolize Dionysus being torn apart, being ripped apart. So something that you could do, essentially, is you could make a bread effigy of Zagreus and rip him apart, which is kind of sad. But essentially you would rip his limbs off of this effigy, and then you would keep his torso and you would consume this torso, and you could give out, pieces of his torso, which symbolizes his heart and his immortal soul to everybody at the table. Zagreus is sort of like a Christ-like figure. He gives Jesus, in every sense of the word. I'm not somebody that's he is Jesus, he is who they base Jesus off of. Maybe not. But he has a very Christ-like vibe to him, in a way. So this effigy thing might seem a little bit like you're taking the sacrament or you're taking the Eucharist or something, and you're consuming, the immortal soul of Zagreus like Dionysus would have, or like Semele would have to been able to birth Dionysus. So it kind of feels a little bit like that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think that it calls upon the fact that these two deities do kind of have a lot in common, especially in what they're teaching to humanity and the fact that they are persecuted for these teachings, right? You could just offer to Zagreus at this time with wine or pine cones or anything pine related. Pine is associated with Dionysus through Zagreus because the pine cone represents the heart of Zagreus that now lives within Dionysus. So anything in relation to pine cones or pine could be given as offerings. You could make, the pine cone wand that the followers of Dionysus hold hold and use in ritual. I think that'd be such a cool way to use this festival into making a wand like that and charging it throughout this festival under, Dionysus and Zagreus's assistance and help. You could also work with the imagery of the heart. And something you could do is write down a bunch of things that you want to essentially transmute in your life on a heart, and then you can burn that heart and ask Zagreus and Dionysus to assist you in this transmutation process. So that could be a really interesting spell idea, simple, easy spell idea that you can do that honors all of the themes of Anthesteria. Of course, drinking wine, offering wine, all of that stuff is totally something you could do. Essentially, Dionysus taught that you should mix wine with water, and that's how you should consume it, which, go off, King. Love that. He would all I can think of is those ads, those skip a drink and drink some water ads. I don't know if you've ever seen those don't drink and drive ads that or drink a glass of water before in between all of your drinks, but that is Dionysian propaganda right there. We kind of talked about putting flowers up, but I think just starting to decorate for spring can be a great way to use this festival, and you can keep these up essentially throughout the spring, and it begins the start, right, of Persephone's Anabasis, of Persephone's rise up from the underworld. So you could also, I know Persephone is not really mentioned in the ancient, celebratory rituals of this festival, but she is a part of the larger cycle. And so you could call upon her this time of year and really ask her, okay, in the final weeks of the winter, what is it that you want me to focus on? And you could connect with her at this time to, kind of almost find this micro timeline from now until, the equinox of something that she wants you to do, something that she wants you to achieve, or something that you can do in dedication to her. I really hope you enjoyed this episode of Diaries of a Witch podcast. If you watched on YouTube, I hope you enjoyed the video version of this and all of that. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, thank you so much for listening and tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this type of an episode. It's a little bit more informative, a little bit more produced. I've been doing kind of a mix of chatty, not so produced episodes and then these types of episodes. I'm also hoping to record and put out one extra YouTube video every month on my YouTube channel specifically that's a little bit more video essay style. This was not scripted, so this wasn't a proper video essay, but I'm hoping to do one video essay a month moving forward that is maybe a little bit shorter, more scripted, and more focused in on teaching and talking and giving commentary on a topic in occultism, witchcraft depictions in modern media, as well as topics in ancient astrology, underworld, Hades, and just Hellenistic paganism in general. So if you are interested in that, make sure you are subscribed to my YouTube channel. So like and subscribe if you're already here, and if you're listening on another platform, please come over to YouTube and follow me, because you're gonna want to stick around for all of the amazing long form content that I post over there. And, there's just been a lot happening on social media in the last couple of weeks. I'm getting such whiplash. I know it's not about me. It has been kind of hard as a content creator, right? This is my full-time job. This is what I do. I do content. I also teach classes, which is a huge part of my income. And then I also meet with clients and do one-to-one readings, tarot and astrology readings, right? So that is my income in addition to content creation. So I think at this time it is important to not only be diversifying where I'm showing up online, but also to be able to be producing more high quality content, almost legacy content, content that I am working really hard on, that I really want to produce for you, that I post on an app like YouTube or, a podcast platform that's kind of separate from all of it. YouTube's been around for such a long time, and, podcast platforms are kind of a totally separate thing from social media. So essentially long form content feels really important to me to post at this time, high quality long form content. So I hope you stick around for that. I hope you enjoy that. And thank you so much for following and subscribing. If you want to support me and my work further, you can become a patron. There are so many things happening every month on Patreon, right? So we have extra events happening every month in the Coven tier. We have live streams every 2 weeks for like approximately like the new moon and full moon. And then I'm constantly updating the portal with blog posts, workbooks, and so many other resources that you can use in your modern witchcraft and occult practice, like the Astrology of 2025 Transit Workbook. So join Patreon and get access to all of that and more. Speaking of my patrons, I want to give a shout out to my Diary and Coven tier members. So thank you so much to Jamie, Cheryl, Emma, Alexis, Alessandra, Ashley, Luna, Taylor, Jordan, Chelsea, Quinn, Floor, Megan A, Megan M, Melissa, Natalie H, Jen, Carrie, Kat, Lauren, Kayla, Alethea, Lindsay, Sarah, Quinn, April, Peony, Danya, Joanna, Megan S, Megan R, Callie, Nina, Irene, Chelb, Haley, Abigail, Kristen, Desiree, BFG, Emmy, Hannah, Georgia, Adri, Liz, Kay, Esty, Kristen, Shell, Veronica, Ella, and my newest member, Isabella. Thank you so much to all of y'all. Thank you to all my listeners. We will talk very soon. Goodbye.